Does your dog have a problem with reactivity on lead? Does your dog bark, stare, growl, pull towards a trigger, pull away from a trigger? Do they charge? Do they lunge? Do they bite? Do they snap? Are you aware that your lead handling can cause or eliminate any of these signs of reactivity? Did you know that the majority of frustration can be solved just like that? Can you even be sure that your dog is reactive? What is reactivity? My name is Stu, I'm Barefoot Paws, and the mission of Barefoot Paws is to provide useful functional performance displayed by your student with enthusiasm, effort, and execution. This episode, we're talking about on-lead reactivity. Let's get some definitions on board so that we're all on the same page for the purpose of this particular episode. First thing that we really want to have a look at is reactivity. What is it? What is it not? So reactivity, for the purpose of this episode, we're looking at a dog who has a defensive response to a particular trigger. That might be other dogs, that might be cars, that might be bikes, that might be children, could be all sorts of things. It doesn't matter what that is, we are going to refer to that eliciting stimulus as a trigger. That eliciting stimulus, aka trigger, will cause your student to react in a detrimental fashion. That is what we're going to be calling reactivity. Some examples. My student is walking on lead. They see a trigger. That could be a bird or a garbage truck or a ute, or it could be a skateboard. It could be a child bouncing a ball. A trigger. My dog now will show me an expression based in a defensive mood. We know that from a defensive mood, there are only 4 particular results or reactions: fight, flight, freeze, and appease. In appease, I'm going to approach the problem, try to befriend that problem to de-escalate a potential conflict. In freeze, I have no way of dealing with this particular issue. I'm going to simply wait, take whatever it is that is coming, and hopefully survive and heal another day. Flight is where I will muster up all of my strength and I will run faster than I can actually run. I will run longer than I can actually endure, and then I will have that space, safety, and security. Fight is where I will go into the problem and I will lunge, bark, bite, and fight my way through to be able to get them to leave me alone. Now, another definition that's worth looking at is this idea or concept of thresholds. You'll hear this a lot. Simply stated, a threshold is the limit where the straw will break the camel's back. And the thresholds are dynamic. Sometimes we have good days, sometimes we have bad days. Sometimes I can deal with a whole heap of pressure and I can take it in my stride. Other days I wake up grumpy, I miss my morning coffee, I'm hungry all day, and someone leaves the fork upside down in the drying rack and it's all over Red Rover. Thresholds simply give us a way of communicating how likely it is for our student to enter that reactivity-based behavior at any given moment in time. We have different moods. The ones that we're going to concentrate on are predatory, social, and defensive moods. All these have a purpose, all of these are legitimate, and all of these moods serve a particular function. We are also going to look at frustration and how frustration can be expressed through predatory, social, and defensive moods, how frustration can raise or lower thresholds. We're also going to see how frustration can elicit reactivity. And dealing with reactivity means that we also have to modulate our students' frustration in a very strategic fashion. Classical conditioning is also something that I want us to define. Classical conditioning, basically, from our perspective through this particular episode, classical conditioning means that when I see a trigger, I feel a certain way. And then from that particular equation, trigger plus feeling equals a response in a certain way. So what classical conditioning means from the purpose of this episode is when I see that eliciting stimulus, that thing that makes me reactive, I feel a certain way, predatory, social, or defensive. And when I have those two put together, that particular mood and that particular stimulus, when I have those two, what I have then is a particular reaction. And in our particular instance, we're looking at, say, for example, a student who will chase a car, a student who will go after a kid's ball and bite it until there's no air left in it. We are talking about a dog who will run away from a skateboard. Certain reactivity is dependent upon a stimulus, trigger, and a mood, a framework upon which added to the trigger creates a particular response. The last thing that we want to have a look at, if we have classical conditioning, well, if I've already got an established response, how do I undo that particular response? This then is called counter conditioning. So counter conditioning is essentially, we take the old classical conditioning, remembering that that's stimulus makes mood happen, stimulus plus mood equals a particular response. So what we do with counter conditioning is we take that stimulus and that mood and we create a different response. Not the old, but the new response. Desensitization is where we take the stimulus and the mood that that stimulus then creates, we start to lessen that. Point of fact is we can actually change the mood away from, for example, a defensive mood, fight, flight, freeze, appease, and we can turn it into something neutral. If we were to require it, we could turn it into something predatory, we could turn it into something social. That is desensitization and classical conditioning. They are not the same thing, they go hand in hand. This is going to get a little bit confusing, so I'm going to repeat. Classical conditioning is when I have a pre-existing response to a mood plus a trigger. If I want to change that response, I need to counter condition that. In order to have a different response, I need to teach my student that the trigger and the mood can create something a different output. In order for that to occur, what needs to happen quite a lot is the mood needs to be turned down. We need to attenuate it. It's like turning down the volume on your stereo. What we want to do is reduce the amount of mood that is felt, the amount of emotions reduces, and that allows us to intellectually deal with the trigger, which is a far faster way of working than just simply throwing food at the mouth of our dog in the hopes that they will eventually eat it. How is it that leash reactivity starts? Well, prepare to be offended. Puppy classes, taking your young or new dog to the beach, taking your young or new dog to the park, taking your puppy out to be patted by loads of people, taking your dog out and letting them sniff, sometimes not, letting them greet people, sometimes not, letting them be molested by people as they walk past, letting them be molested by other dogs as they walk past. Essentially what is happening is, one, your student is being kept on lead and their agency is being eroded. They don't have the ability to deal with the social situation that you have designed by accident or by intent. So what happens is they become more and more frustrated by that particular situation. Trigger plus the frustration. Frustration will usually yield some sort of a defensive mood. That then starts to classically condition, and slowly we have this defensive mood that is being built. Slowly we start to enter fight, flight, freeze, appease. As a puppy, most of it is appease because there is no way that they can outfight a problem. There is no way they can outrun a problem. Freezing is not a puppy behavior unless it's super intense. So they try to appease everything. And most of us think, hey, that's awesome. And the issue there is that there is a massive part of the iceberg of puppy classes that teach exactly that. Oh, look, isn't that cute? They're playing. Well, actually, they're conversing, and that's a very toxic one-sided relationship that's going on. While these 3 Mastiff or Bully breeds are starting to smash this little Corgi, well, the Corgi looks like they're having a good time as they're running around with their tail up, their tail back, or their tail tucked. That's irrelevant. No one seems to care about that. But as the Corgi's starting to move around the puppy class and gain speed the entire time, and the other dogs that are much bigger are starting to roll it, what is happening is the Corgi is learning the only way to deal with this situation is by using my speed and my agility. What happens then when we put them on lead? There is no more speed. There is no agility. But through classical conditioning, what we've now built in our students' menu of repertoire is dogs make me feel defensive, means I have to run around, means I have to use my agility. Then we go and strap a lead on them. What do you think's going to happen? They're going to hit the end of the lead trying to run up, trying to run around, trying to run away. And eventually we make that lead tight because it's so terribly uncomfortable for us. Now what we're starting to do is negatively reinforce the reactivity. We are heightening the mood. That's what negative reinforcement is fantastic for. Heightening moods, building enthusiasm. But what we're accidentally doing is we are peaking enthusiasm for the detriment, not for the benefit. So we are smashing volume into our dogs, but we're flipping that over to the red scale. That's not good. What is happening over time is that our students become frustrated at not being able to do the things that worked for them in puppy class. It worked for them at the dog park. It worked for them at home when you brought all of the other dogs over and had a puppy party and I really didn't know what was going on. All of those things tend to happen off lead, and then we put our dogs on lead. We haven't taught our dogs how to walk with us effectively. We haven't been able to subject our dogs to certain mild fears to be able to teach them how exactly can we escape this problem? How exactly can we remain neutral around this particular problem? What does this particular problem or this particular picture mean to us as a team? Instead, what we've accidentally taught our students is you're on an island on your own, you're going to hit the end of the lead, that is going to heighten frustration, and eventually your little puppy is not going to be fluffy bow wow anymore, they're going to be whatever it is they're breeding indicates to them. So a German Shepherd is going to get extremely vocal, they're going to get very toothy. A Border Collie is going to become increasingly more nervous and increasingly faster. A Chihuahua is just going to bark and bark and bark until they have an aneurysm. They're going to express their breeding more and more as frustration heightens. And once their frustration level gets to a certain point, they go over the next threshold. Now they're not their breeding anymore. They're certainly not the individual that you know and love that, oh, she's a beautiful dog, but when on this, she's not a beautiful dog anymore. She's not a breeding anymore. She's just a canine now. And in that particular instance, it's all about fight, flight, freeze, and appease. And those are horrible, ugly responses to have in a civilized world that we live in. Those are not the responses that we want to feel. Those are not the responses we want our dogs to feel. And yet we accidentally do that a lot by keeping our dogs on lead after we've taught them how to inappropriately interact with other dogs. So let us look at an operant way through instrumental learning. What does all of this stuff, how does it come together? How's this sauce made? Well, let me tell you how, in Skinnerian terms, leash reactivity can be built. First, I have my dog on lead. They hit the end of the lead, and through classical conditioning, remember the trigger is lead on. Doesn't matter what it's on, the lead is on and secured to my dog. Lead is on and secured to my dog. My dog now, who naturally moves faster than I do, hits the end of the lead. Classical conditioning. Lead on, get to the end of the lead. Pulling is a mood-based situation. So lead on, as soon as that happens, my mood heightens, my response is hit the end of that lead. Doesn't even need to be hard to start with. The pulling is just, my dog is sitting on the sidelines at the extent of the lead. But what happens is I take a step towards them, and my student who is now, let's say for example, they're looking for 10 pounds of pressure on the collar. Now with just inching forwards, the pressure on the collar has reduced. My student says, that's aberrant. I need to put that tension back on. So by removing that tension, remember, we have positive and we have negative in operant conditioning. Positive, I add something. Negative, I take something away. In this instance, as I step towards my student, I am taking tension away. That's negative. This isn't emotionally based. Positive, oh, I'm so happy. Negative, oh, I'm so glum. That's not how it works. Positive, I give, I provide, something is added. Negative, I subtract, I take, something is removed. So again, I move forwards means I'm putting slack into the lead. I am removing a certain amount of pressure from the lead, and that is what my student feels. My student feels that. So that reinforces the behavior of pulling because they're going to move back to get that 10 pounds of pressure on the lead. So again, collar on, makes dog pull. I move forwards, reducing the pressure by whatever amount. My student perceives that difference, that negative input, and that reinforces their pulling. So now again, they move to the extent of the lead. I step forward, no more pressure. They go back out, they find their normal pressure. But what happens is, through classical conditioning, as I continue this to and froing, pressure off, they put pressure on, pressure off, they put pressure on, pressure off, they put more pressure on. Because what happens is, as we start to do this, and my dogs are starting to become frustrated, because every time you start to build a tempo, and then you go and change it, and then you keep that tempo up again, and then you go and change it. And if I were to continue this type of delivery, you would actually get really frustrated, and you would have to find a way of skipping, because it's terribly difficult to go on and off and on and off and on and off all the time. And this is exactly the same type of effect that is happening with your student. So they start to pull more in anticipation of you relieving that stress. So where you initially had 10 pounds of pressure on your dog's collar, now they go, well, I'm going to put 15 on because you're going to take 3 off. And I'm still in a bonus. So now I've got 12 pounds of pressure instead of 15. I'm still ahead of the game. But we habituate to that. That means we get normal to that. So as that starts to become normal, we go away from, like, we've left 10 pounds of pressure behind. That's old school. Now we're 15 pounds. Now we're 20 pounds. Now we're 30 pounds. Before we know it, my dog is scratching their nails and their pads raw, going for a walk. I've got to wrap that lead around my hand, and I can feel it squeezing the blood out of my fingers. And it's just because I'm taking my dog for a walk. But their mood is so heightened now that any little thing can happen and they will blow off. They will hit a predatory mood, they will hit a defensive mood in a heartbeat, and I just don't know where that comes from. And this is really important for us to learn, because not only am I negatively reinforcing that tight lead walk, what is also happening is positive reinforcement. Remember, positive is provide, give, add. Reinforcement means to increase the intensity and or frequency of a behavior. So where's the positive reinforcement? When your student hits the end of that lead and they achieve their normal, that is relief. When you go back into a habit and you're flicking through Facebook, you're flicking through Netflix or whatever, and you're just watching previews, that's relief, that's reinforcing. But it is the adding of relief. You've had the negative reinforcement, take slack away, then bang, you find that happy, normal place of tension that is now added into the mix. That's positively reinforcing. Plus, the internal relief that is built up within your student. So you have negative reinforcement into the behavior, and you have a double up of positive reinforcement coming out of behavior. That's 3 layers of reinforcement just to build reactivity on lead, because now your student understands, right, when I'm on lead, I get frustrated, I feel a heightened mood, and I have no tolerance for everything. That means that their threshold has come plummeting down. The straw will literally break the dog's back, and then all cards are off the table. We don't know what's going to happen. All right, no more mucking around. Now that we understand how we accidentally built on lead reactivity, we know exactly what it looks like, because you're listening to this and you've probably got a dog with on lead reactivity. You deal with this every day. How are we going to fix it? 1, build a TAM. Remember what a TAM is? A terminal appetitive marker. As that's going to be your clicker, it can be a whistle, whatever it is. We're just going to call it a TAM. So generally speaking, we will build a TAM with a runway. Throw food left, let them go get it. Throw food right, let them go get it. Eventually they're going to get a huge portion of their meal straight out of my hands. And just before they get there, I'm going to provide the TAM. Now what I'm doing is I'm teaching my dog to move with speed, I'm teaching them to smash into my hands, and I'm teaching them to steal the food out of my hands. This makes for an extremely powerful expression within a predatory mood. It's very important to have this predatory mood, because most reactivity is born of frustration in the social and defensive mood sets, not predatory. And what happens then is, if I change my dog's mood out of social, out of defense, and into predatory, now I can start to help my dog counter condition and desensitize to something that is far more normal and civilized whilst keeping them in a natural instinctual mood set. The biggest takeaway you can get out of this episode is this. Now listen carefully, review this as many times as you need to until the dots connect. Whatever enthusiasm your student displays when you present your TAM, that is the best display your student can give you into anything you teach with that TAM. So for example, if you click and your dog lackadaisically turns around to you, looks away, yawns, then saunters over and takes the food with their tongue, you've got nothing to deal with. You don't have leverage, you don't have any enthusiasm, you have nothing. Your first step is to build that TAM into something appreciable, something usable, something that you can help your student get over life with. If, on the other side, you click and your student comes running, they do a burnout on your hardwood floors as they come running up to you, and they've got that big grin, their ears are forward, their eyes are bright, their tail is locked, bang, let's go. If you've got that sort of an easily discernible image, that is then contingent to your TAM. Now you've got some leverage. Now you've got some power tools to be able to desensitize very quickly, counter condition very efficiently, and make yours and your student's life so much better. 2, associate the TAM with the trigger. And the very first trigger that we want to deal with, if you can remember, is the lead. Right now, if you cast your mind back to earlier on in this episode, the lead is the first stimulus to indicate, get pumped, we're going out for Fight Club. That's the first trigger that we put on our students before they even go out the door. So if I change the response to that, everything else starts to cascade from that new mood. Much easier. Now what tends to happen is when I turn up to a client's home, we've got all sorts of paraphernalia, we got all sorts of things going on, and I remove that and I bring in something brand new. If you were to turn up to a set of traffic lights and instead of being vertical, they were horizontal, instead of red, amber and green, you had blue, teal and white, how would you respond? You wouldn't know what to do. Do I read these left to right? Do I read them right to left? Do I read them from the middle and have to look at the outside? What color means what? You suddenly don't know and now you're confused. You have to think, because you can't just, like you do now, classically conditioned response towards red means stop. There are conditions to the amber light. The first 3 amber lights I come to on my daily commute, well, I might slow down, but that 4th one, baby, I'm speeding up. And green, go like the clappers. Those are conditioned responses to the traffic lights that you know and love. But if we change those traffic lights around, you don't have a response. You have to think. That's what's so beautiful about when the lights go out and there's no more traffic lights at a 4-way junction. What does everybody do? They suddenly drive as if they're accountable for their actions because, hey, they are. They have to go back to the road rules. They have to go back to the fundamentals. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing with our students. I'll take out a slip lead. I will show a student a slip lead. As soon as they look at it, TAM, then they'll be given a consequence. They'll look at it, TAM, consequence, TAM, consequence, TAM, consequence. Then they'll look at it and I'll wait. And now they're like, yeah, but hang on, wait a minute. Where's this TAM? Then they'll push in. They'll go and touch it. Sweet. Well, now what I'll do is I'll put some food on the other side of the lead while I hold the lead up, and they've got to put their nose through it. And very slowly, very methodically, very systematically, I start to engineer a very precise framework within which we classically condition the new lead. So when I do put that lead on, our students are already geared up. As soon as I see that lead, that is associated with the TAM, and I love my TAM. It makes me feel strong, fast, it makes me feel like I'm a massive predator, the apex predator of my backyard. Sweet. So now I can start to leverage that, and I can start to make the lead at least neutral, if not beneficial, to our student. Distance is hugely important. It is also going to vary. We are not talking about robots and widgets. We are talking about physical, biological, sentient, living beings. They have moods, they have emotions, they have good days, they have bad days. But distance is something that I can very, very precisely measure. When I'm starting with any sort of a case and we're teaching a walk, the first lesson by the time we get out into the public domain is we're going to walk to the end of your driveway, we're going to turn left or right, we're going to walk to that next driveway, we are going to stop, enjoy some liberty, and we are going home. Because what we're doing now is we have transported our student from a known place of safety and security. We have put them into a new place that is not safe and secure. We teach them that it is safe and secure, and then we get out before bad things happen. Same thing happens with our on-lead reactive students. I don't simply subject them to their fears. If I've got an on-lead reactive dog, I do not take them to the beach. I do not take them to the park. I do not sit in the cafe with them whilst other dogs are walking past. It's insanity to expect a sudden change in classically conditioned responses because we haven't done any prior learning. What has happened is we have classically conditioned a response. Now we've got to like it or lump it. I can either affect some change or I can hopelessly wait for my dog's end of days. Up to you. If I understand distance, what I can start to do is regulate the intensity of the trigger. Quite commonly, what I tend to find is that the eliciting distance, the critical distance, tends to be somewhere between 20 and 50 meters. It is very rare for a student to react under that 10 meters in the initial stages. And it is also very rare for a dog to react to over 50 meters distance. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does happen, 100%. But the vast majority of cases, somewhere between 10 and 50 meters, my gosh, that's a pretty big distance. But here's what happens. We start to find a comfortable distance and we go, oh, do you know what? Today, my student seems to be okay at 10 meters. Let's just stay at 10 meters. Well, if I only stay at 10 meters forever, I am now isolating myself from that situation. I am no longer fostering adaptation. I'm fostering isolation, and isolation makes any problem worse. What I must do, even with a reactive student, is create, foster, and promote adaptation. So if I want to get stronger, I don't just lift up 100 kilos and think, hey, that's it, I'm done. I've got to work my way up to 100 kilos. And then I'm only 100 kilos strong. Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not. Adaptation means that I will get myself stronger towards lifting that 100 kilos, but if I stop somewhere, I will plateau at that level of strength. If I can only lift 50 kilos, then I will only ever be able to lift 50 kilos, and then soon enough I will start to struggle with that too. I have to continually pile on extra pressure in order to create that adaptation, and it's the same thing with distance. Again, this is not bucket chemistry, this is teaspoon chemistry. What we are doing is we are systematically working our way, inch by inch in some cases, closer and closer to that eliciting distance. Think of it like this. Let's say, for example, you have your stereo, your car stereo is on at max. You're a kilometer away. Can you hear your favorite song? Probably not. Now you're 5 meters away. Can you hear it? Yep, and it's really loud. You're in the driver's seat. Your eardrums are bursting. If you think of it like that, it might be easier to understand what your student is going through. A kilometer away, the intensity of the stimulus is so small, it's insignificant. 5 meters away, that's a very, very intense stimulus. It's a very intense trigger. When they're adjacent to the trigger, it is overwhelming, and I am now I am forcing my student into a reaction. What is very, very difficult when we've got leash-based reactivity is to avoid the problem behavior, that classically conditioned response. We don't ever want to see it again. Because as soon as we see it, we realize, we've stuffed it, we've overstepped the mark, but now I've eroded a bunch of training that I've done. And especially early on, what can happen is your dog can have the "you lied to me" effect. And we don't want our students to do that. Later on down the track, as we get into the testing phases, we can start to approximate those particular situations, and we can say, do you know what? We are really close and you're right on the edge of what you can do. Now that I know you far better than I ever knew you before, I can start to regulate how your classical conditioning, old, competes with the classical conditioning, new. Best, easiest way to do that, people, is through modulating the distance at which you expose your student. You want to gradually get closer, not leapfrog towards that problem. 4, desensitization and counter conditioning. How do we do it? We must have some sort of a framework which our students can predict, understand, and acknowledge and respond to in order for them to be able to create a new conditioned response. We have classically conditioned 1.0, lead frustration, sucks. What we want is the beneficial 2.0, at least neutrality. So how do we do that? I do it through Liberty. Let's look at the framework on how Liberty works. We understand that Liberty gives us a predictable framework within which we can present our student with a trigger, followed by a TAM. From there, we can then gauge the effectiveness or the efficacy of our consequence. We can evaluate, rinse and repeat. So let's look at some particular strategies so that we can head in the right direction. Differential reinforcement is how we'll do it. What does that mean? Differential reinforcement, for the purposes of this episode, means that I'm going to reinforce something different to what's going on now. Let us look at 2 particular ways that I can reinforce my way out of this particular problem. Both of them are going to be using the concept of differential reinforcement. We have to keep in mind that in order for a behavior or a response to perpetuate, it must be reinforcing. It must be reinforcing enough to continue to drive that classically conditioned response in the future. It must be reinforcing. We have to understand that. We have to accept that. When your student is going totally sideways, there is reinforcement driving that. Now then, if I were to provide a couple of avenues to reinforce alternative or incompatible responses / behaviors, then I'm starting to reinforce those to a greater level than the current reactivity. So that difference between the two is what we're referring to at the moment when we're saying differential reinforcement. This is very basic to very top down. So either I can allow the reactivity to continue to perpetuate, or I can slowly chisel away at that whilst building other behaviors, other responses. So in Liberty, I will now present the TAM to anything that our student perceives. This is called differential reinforcement of any behavior. I'm not necessarily looking at reinforcing a particular response, such as a sit, heel, down, whatever. I'm looking at throwing out as much reinforcement as I can so that, in general, I'm able to desensitize my student, point A, because now they're starting to get the predictable nature. Trigger makes TAM happen, awesome consequence. And as we start to do that with small to mild temptations or triggers, then I can start to get my student in tune with what is going on in the constraint of liberty. So through the differential reinforcement, any other behavior, sniffing grass, circling, walking, ear twitches, tail carriage changes, all of these minute things that our students find themselves doing, if I mark those, pay those, and start judging and evaluating the quality of the consequence, then I can start to make sure that we're getting better reinforcement to a different set of responses than the old reactivity.
The other one is the differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. So something that's relatively easily recognized is I send my dog to their bed when I'm going to get the vacuum cleaner out, because when they're on their bed, that is mutually exclusive to running out and attacking the vacuum cleaner. Those are incompatible behaviors. Another one would be teaching your dog to sit when greeting strangers. Sitting is incompatible with jumping. So I am reinforcing on the one side the civil behaviors, the sits, the place, for example, and then the reinforcement that is not forthcoming from those innate behaviors like the jumping, the attacking of the vacuum cleaner, though that reinforcement is starting to diminish because it's not able to happen, because these other behaviors are happening. And through that differential, what is happening is one set of responses, the old, the ugly, starts to dissipate down to zero, and the other starts to maximize. That's what we can do with our obedience skills, for example. Our heels, our sits, our downs, our stays, our recalls, our call-offs, all of these sorts of things. My dog is running up to another dog at the beach. That other dog is on lead. Oh, crikey, that's probably not a great idea. Come back. They turn on a 20-cent coin. They come rushing back. Hey, what's up? What can we do? Well, we can walk the other way, pal. So I've got this differential reinforcement strategy. This is a concept. I'm reinforcing one preferred option or a multitude of options over the existing response. So, differential reinforcement is your friend, especially when you've got a reactive dog. And once you have been able to teach your student the framework of liberty, how that works. Again, I use liberty. There's no commands. You are on lead, so the anchor hand stays plugged to your belly button. Stay within range. Behave well. And from there, we have this nice level playing field where we can basically mark then reinforce any tickle in order to be able to change our students' associated moods with particular triggers without reinforcing anything specific. However, I might also be working on heel and something else happens, and I might mark then pay whilst we're in that heel despite the temptation, even if it makes my student a little bit shaky, because that learning then is happening. And now what I'm doing is I'm starting to differentially reinforce the incompatible behavior of heeling with me, which is incompatible with barking, lunging, snarling, all those sorts of carry-ons towards the trigger. Now that we've unpacked liberty, we've unpacked the DRI and the DRA, we understand what's going on. We understand that it's all about the loose lead for a leash reactive dog in particular. When do we get to decrease the distance? So I have this system where it's 4 out of 5. We want 80% efficacy in anything that we are doing. Don't worry about going 100%. If you try to go for 100%, all that means is you're making the training too easy, because there's no failure. If you're making the training too easy, you will never adapt, you will reach a plateau, and then from there you will regress very quickly. Failure is your friend. If I can do a series of repetitions, let's just say I do 4 repetitions, one after the other, and all of them are successful, then there's no point me hanging around at that particular level of training. We're going to progress. So with a leash reactive dog, that might just mean that instead of being 20 meters away, maybe I'll go down to 18. Maybe I'll go down to 15 meters. I've got to judge that based upon the capacity of myself, the capacity of my student, and how much control I can assert over the environment. So I can start to decrease the distance based on that rule of 80% efficacy. 4 out of 5 is 80% success. If I can continue to maintain that 80% success rate, then I'm within my scope of being able to continually progressing and getting closer and closer to that trigger, with the goal of being able to get as close as possible to that trigger. Think about it like this. You have to walk across that road. There's one medium strip. You have a dog reactive dog, only reactive on lead. There's another pair coming across the road from the opposite direction. You have to walk past each other. Unless you have trained for that particular event, wait for them to cross, get to your safe distance, then cross the road. But if you've been able to progress far enough that you can heel, walk across the road. You get across the road. As soon as you get to, let's just say, for example, your student starts to wig out at about a meter, simply say yes, present them with a consequence right in the heel position. As soon as they finish that food, recommand the heel, continue on your merry way. You get to the opposite side of the road. Thank you, they're now at liberty. Boom, job done. You managed to heel across the road within 1 meter of a trigger, 1 TAM, 2 commands. Perfect. Finish with something nice like some liberty. They start to associate performance, beneficial, productive performance with their trigger. And you were able to navigate your way through the differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. Heal with me as we get past this trigger. The skill becomes the escape, not the fight. Let us very quickly summarize. Tight leads are your enemy, loose leads are your friend. You keep that lead tight and you teach your dog to hold that lead tight. They will look for that tension, and if it's not there, they will seek it out. That is how you get reactivity. Instead, teach them to walk on a loose lead to start with. That is how you avoid a lot of reactivity. Use skills as well as liberty to be able to help navigate life, to desensitize and counter condition using differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors for skills and any other behaviors for when you're at liberty. Build a TAM that your dog will happily run towards you to get that consequence. If you've liked this episode, I would love for you to like it, comment on it, share it, shoot me an email at admin@barefootpaws.com.au. I'll get back to you and I'll be able to answer all of your questions. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you around in the next episode.